Hi, welcome back to the Octopus Ukulele Academy with me, Andy Eastwood, and today's question comes from Brian Johnson. He says, "Hi Andy, what are your views on playing a Hawaiian D7 chord instead of a standard D7? Good question, Brian. I'll do my best to answer it for you. So before I set about answering this question, we better define what is a Hawaiian D7 chord and what is a standard D7. Well, when you look at ukulele literature, particularly educational literature, which specifies the fingerings of chords, you will see two versions possibly of D7. And the most common standard one is this. It's barring the second fret on the G, C and E strings, giving you A, D, F sharp, and then third fret on the A string giving you C. So from bottom to top you've got D, the root of the chord, the third F sharp, the fifth A, and C, the seventh at the top. So a very full, complete sounding D7. Now, what is the so-called Hawaiian version? Well, it's this. Second fret on the G string giving you A, open C string, second fret on the E string giving you F sharp, and open A. So you have two A's in the chord, which is a bit of a waste really. When you've only got four strings, it seems a waste to play the same note on two of them. And you've got the seventh of the chord, which is C, at the bottom, which is quite an unusual place to put it. And you've got F sharp. You have no D in the chord, so strictly speaking, it's incomplete. It's not a complete D7 chord. So it's a bit of a myth to call it D7. It's a sort of a fake D7. It's also a myth to call it Hawaiian. It's not Hawaiian in any way. It doesn't sound inherently Hawaiian, and the Hawaiian players I've met don't particularly favour it over the other version of D7 in any way. So it also goes in hand with another myth, the myth that bar chords are difficult to do on a ukulele, which they're not. Either way of playing it, it's still a two-finger chord. So it's a strange mythical chord really, the Hawaiian so-called D7. Where on earth does it come from? Let's try and figure it out. And here's the answer. It comes from the guitar, or it comes from guitarists transferring over to the uke and bringing their chord shapes with them. Now, if you've ever played uke and guitar, you'll recognize straight away that a lot of the chord shapes are very similar. And that's simply because the top four strings on a guitar are tuned D, G, B, E, which is a transposition of G, C, E, A. In other words, the intervals between the strings are the same, they're just in a different key. So this very familiar shape, which we would call G on the uke, is D on the guitar. And the Hawaiian D7 would be A7 on the guitar. Now the difference is, of course, that on the guitar you've got more strings. So the next string down, the fifth string, is playing the note A, so that makes it a very full and complete A7. When you transfer that shape over to the uke, you have to forget the bottom two strings, of course. So then you have an incomplete sounding D7 with no root to the chord. No one would ever have picked up a ukulele in the first place trying to work out how to create D7 and come up with that. It only comes from the guitar, and it comes from guitarists being a little bit careless about how they transfer their chord shapes from one instrument to the other. And they may try to glamorize it by calling it Hawaiian, but they're not really fooling anyone. Actually, the great musicians of the Hawaiian tradition don't deserve to have this foisted upon them. It should be called, if anything, a lazy D7. So what is actually wrong with the lazy version of the chord? Well, I'll just talk briefly about the way in which seventh chords work, and you can read more about this if you want to. But to put it simply, seventh chords propel the music forward through its harmonic progressions by tension and resolution. So when you hear a seventh chord, it sounds like it wants to move to a more pleasing chord. In other words, the dissonance in the chord wants to resolve. So when you hear D7, for instance, you've got this discordant harmony between the F sharp and the C that sounds not very pleasing in itself. It sounds like the F sharp wants to move up to G, and it sounds like the C wants to move down to B, and that's what's actually propelling the music from one chord to the next. Now, when you do the lazy version of that chord, you've still got C and F sharp, but now the C is at the bottom, and it sounds like the C wants to drop down to B, but we don't have that B on the uke. This is the lowest pitch on the uke, so when we move from this D7 to this G, we're going from C down there to B up here, and it's a very disjointed progression. It doesn't sound anything like as natural and smooth as this one. Added to that, We've got another point. The note D is missing completely in the lazy chord. So we're missing out completely the dissonance between the D and the C, which is even further adding to the pull that's driving the C down towards B. So it's a much weaker chord, and it leads to a much less satisfying progression. So let's bring this to some kind of conclusion. If the harmony required is D7, the so-called Hawaiian version of the chord will fit. But most of the time, the standard version is going to sound better and more effective. I'm not saying I never ever used the Hawaiian D7. I can think of a melody arrangement I did recently where the chord was D7 and the melody went A, B, C, B, A. So I harmonized it a sixth below the melody with C, D, E, D, C. So that gave me Hawaiian D7, D6, D9, and back again. It sounded nice, and I had a particular musical reason for wanting to use that voicing of the chord, but most of the time people are using it simply because they think it's easier than the bar chord version. And my question to those people is, what on earth are you doing so wrong in your approach to bar chords that makes you think you need an alternative?